The Void Empress stood at the observation deck of her flagship, watching another star system bend to her will. Her black armor reflected nothing, absorbing light like a hungry shadow. Across the galaxy, entire civilizations spoke her name in whispers, afraid that saying it too loudly might summon her wrath. Admiral Kexathera, the Destroyer, the Butcher of Proxima, the one who turned the crystal cities of Vega Prime into glass dust with a single command. For 300 years, she had carved her empire through space, leaving behind only conquest and terror. The bridge crew worked in absolute silence around her. Even her most trusted officers avoided direct eye contact. They had seen what happened to those who showed weakness or questioned her orders. The recycling units still held traces of the last captain who had suggested mercy. "Status report," her voice cut through the air like a blade made of ice. 17 more systems have surrendered without resistance, Empress," reported her intelligence officer, keeping his eyes fixed on his console. "The humans continue to resist from their outer colonies." Kexathera allowed herself a rare smile. It was not a pleasant sight. Humans. Such a young species. They think courage can overcome superior firepower. The humans had appeared on the galactic stage barely 2 centuries ago. While most species took millennia to develop interstellar travel, these strange bipeds had accomplished it in mere decades. They expanded rapidly, establishing colonies throughout the Outer Rim territories. Most species had immediately submitted to Kexathera's empire when they encountered her forces. The Zephyrians had lasted 3 days. The mighty Corvan hegemony had held out for 2 weeks before their government fled to deep space. But the humans kept fighting. They fought from asteroid bases and hidden moon installations. When their main fleets were destroyed, they used converted cargo ships packed with explosives. When their planets fell, survivors escaped to continue resistance from caves and ruins. "They have no concept of when they are beaten," muttered her tactical officer. "That will change," Kexathera said, studying the holographic display showing human territories. "Bring me their leaders. When they see their champions broken, their spirit will finally shatter." Her fleet moved toward the Kepler system, where intelligence suggested a major human military installation operated. The humans had been gathering their remaining forces there, possibly planning some desperate final assault. The journey took 6 days. During that time, Kexathera received updates on human activities throughout their territories. They continued their hopeless resistance, sending small raiding parties against her supply lines and rescue missions to evacuate civilian populations from conquered worlds. "Such dedication to futile gestures," she observed while reviewing the reports. "It almost seems admirable." Her second-in-command, General Vorth, looked up in surprise. In 3 centuries of service, he had never heard the Empress express anything resembling respect for an enemy. "Shall I increase the pressure on their civilian populations?" he asked carefully. "No." The word came out sharper than intended. Kexathera frowned at her own reaction. "Continue standard operations. We will break their military first." When her fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system, they found exactly what intelligence had predicted. A massive human battle group waited near the 4th planet, their ships arranged in defensive formations around what appeared to be a heavily fortified space station. "Scan the station," Kexathera ordered. "I want to know what they think can save them." The results puzzled her officers. The station showed minimal weapon signatures but massive power readings from its core. It appeared to be some kind of research facility rather than a military stronghold. "Should we destroy it from range?" asked her weapons officer. "No. I want prisoners. Board the station and bring me their commanding officers alive." The battle was brief but intense. Human ships fought with typical desperation, using suicide runs and coordinated attacks that cost Kexathera more vessels than she had expected. But overwhelming numbers eventually prevailed. Her boarding parties encountered fierce resistance on the station. Humans fought from every corridor and chamber, making the attackers pay for every meter of progress. It took 4 hours to secure the facility. When the shooting finally stopped, Kexathara transported aboard personally. She wanted to see what the humans had been protecting so desperately. The station's central laboratory held banks of computers and research equipment she didn't recognize. Human scientists and military personnel stood under guard, their hands secured but their eyes still defiant. Most species would have been begging for mercy by now. "Which of you commands here?" she demanded. A woman in Admiral's uniform stepped forward. She was younger than Kexathara had expected, with short brown hair and calm green eyes that showed no fear. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen, commanding officer of this facility. And what exactly were you researching that was worth dying for?" Admiral Chen studied her for a long moment. "Language." "Language?" Kexathara had expected weapons research or shield technology. "What possible military value does language have?" "More than you might think," Chen replied. "We've been studying the origins of names and their power across different cultures. Fascinating subject." Something in the human's tone made Kexathara uneasy. There was too much confidence in those words, as if the Admiral knew something important that she didn't. "Explain." "Names have power," Chen said simply. "True names especially. Every culture in the galaxy understands this on some level. The name someone chooses to use tells you about who they want to be. But the name they were born with, that tells you who they really are." Kexathara felt an unexpected chill run down her spine. "Get to the point, human." "We've been researching the histories of galactic leaders. It's amazing what you can learn when you dig deep enough into old records and archives." Admiral Chen's smile was entirely too knowing. "For instance, we discovered some very interesting information about the early life of a certain Void Empress." The bridge went completely silent. Even the human prisoners seemed to sense that something significant was happening. "You know nothing about me," Kexathara said, but her voice lacked its usual certainty. "We know you weren't always a conqueror," Chen continued. "We found records from your home planet, from before you became the destroyer. Birth certificates, childhood medical records, school attendance logs. Very thorough record-keeping, your people." Kexathara's hand moved instinctively toward her weapon. No one had spoken of her origins in over 2 centuries. She had made sure of that by destroying every record and eliminating everyone who remembered. "Your birth name was quite lovely," Admiral Chen said softly. "Liralai Thekmara. It means Song of Hope in the old tongue, doesn't it?" The name hit Kexathara like a physical blow. She staggered backward, memories flooding through her mind unbidden. A small girl on a peaceful farming world singing to the crop tenders. Parents who had believed their daughter would grow up to heal rather than harm. A name given with love and optimism for the future. All around the laboratory, her soldiers stood frozen. They had never seen their Empress show weakness of any kind. "Stop," Kexathara whispered. "Lyra Lay," Admiral Chen repeated, and this time her voice was gentle instead of victorious. "That little girl who wanted to be a doctor, who cried when she accidentally stepped on a flower, who sang lullabies to injured animals." "Stop!" Kexathara screamed, drawing her weapon and pointing it at the human admiral. But Chen didn't flinch. Instead, she took a step closer. "What happened to her, Lyra Lay? What happened to that little girl who just wanted to help people?" The weapon trembled in Kexathara's hands as memories crashed over her like waves. She was no longer standing on a human research station. In her mind, she was 8 years old again, running through golden fields on Thekmara Prime while her parents worked the healing gardens. "My family grew medicinal plants," she heard herself saying, the words coming out without her permission. "We supplied half the sector with natural remedies." Admiral Chen nodded encouragingly. "The records mention your aptitude for biology. top scores in every examination. I wanted to cure the wasting plague that was spreading through the outer colonies. Kexthara's voice sounded strange to her own ears, softer than it had been in centuries. I was going to study at the Medical Institute on Centauri. Her officers exchanged worried glances. General Vorth stepped forward cautiously. Empress, perhaps we should... Silence. The word came out with less force than usual, but it was still enough to freeze him in place. What changed? Chen asked quietly. What turned a healer into a destroyer? Kexthara closed her eyes, and suddenly she was 16 again. The day the Corvan hegemony arrived at Thekmara Prime with their massive warships and impossible demands. The Corvans wanted our planet for military bases, she said. They claimed it was strategically important for their expansion into the Andromeda sector. My parents tried to negotiate. They offered to share our medical knowledge, to establish healing centers throughout Corvan space. The laboratory was completely silent now. Even the human prisoners were listening intently. The Corvan commander said our offer was insufficient. He gave us 72 hours to evacuate the entire population. Everything we had built over generations, all our research, our cultural sites, none of it mattered to them. Admiral Chen's expression softened. Your parents refused to leave. They couldn't abandon the medicinal gardens. Hundreds of worlds depended on those medicines. People were dying from diseases that only our plants could cure. Kexthara's hand holding the weapon dropped slightly. My father said that sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when you know you can't win. The memory played out in perfect clarity. Her parents standing in the main square with 3,000 other colonists who had chosen to resist, the Corvan warships descending through the atmosphere, the energy weapons that turned living beings into ash in seconds. I hid in the root cellars like my parents told me. I watched through a crack in the foundation as they killed everyone, my mother, my father, my teachers, my friends, everyone I had ever known. But you survived, Chen said gently. I survived because I was a coward. The words tasted bitter. I stayed hidden for 3 days while the Corvans looted our world. When their ships finally left, I was alone among the ruins. Kexthara opened her eyes and looked directly at Admiral Chen. For the first time in 3 centuries, another being saw past the mask of the Void Empress to the broken girl underneath. A Zenithian rescue ship found me 2 weeks later, half-starved, alone, surrounded by the bodies of my people. They took me to their home world and gave me shelter. The Zenithians were known for their compassion, Chen observed. They must have tried to help you heal. They tried. Kexthara's laugh held no humor. They sent me to therapists and support groups. They wanted me to process my trauma, to find healthy ways to cope with loss. But all I could think about was how the Corvans had faced no consequences for what they did. She began pacing the laboratory, her officers stepping carefully out of her path. The Zenithian government sent formal protests to the Corvan hegemony. They demanded justice for my people. Do you know what the Corvans said? She turned to face Chen again. They said that Thekmara Prime had been legally acquired through eminent domain procedures. The deaths were classified as resistance suppression and were therefore justified under interstellar law. The weapon in her hand began to steady as old anger replaced the vulnerable memories. I studied everything I could about galactic politics and military tactics. I learned that the universe is divided into 2 types of beings, those with enough power to take what they want, and those who suffer because they cannot stop them. So you chose power, Chen said. I chose to never be helpless again. Kexthara's voice was growing stronger. I enlisted in the Zenithian Defense Force at 18. By 25, I was leading special operations missions against pirate fleets. By 30, I commanded my own battle group. General Vorth looked relieved to hear traces of his empress returning. But Chen seemed to sense there was more to the story. When did you leave the Zenithians? The admiral asked. when I realized they were just as weak as my parents had been. The admission came out harsh and bitter. We captured a Corvan supply convoy that was smuggling weapons to terrorist cells. I wanted to execute the crew as war criminals, but Zenithian Command ordered me to treat them according to prisoner protocols. Kexathera resumed pacing, her movements becoming more aggressive. I watched those Corvan officers sit in comfortable cells, eating regular meals and receiving medical care, while their terrorist allies used the weapons they had smuggled to massacre civilian populations on 6 different worlds. You disobeyed orders, Chen guessed. I executed the entire crew and broadcast their confessions throughout Corvan space. The terrorist attacks stopped within a week when their supply lines were exposed. Her eyes met Chen's. Zenithian Command court-martialed me for war crimes. The laboratory fell silent except for the hum of equipment. Kexathera's officers had never heard this story before. They had always assumed their empress had been born to command, that her rise to power had been inevitable. They were going to lock me away for 40 years, she continued. 40 years while the galaxy continued to burn because civilized beings refused to do what was necessary to stop evil. So you escaped, Chen said. I liberated myself and took my battle group with me. Most of my officers understood that sometimes the right thing is not the legal thing. Kexathera looked around at her current crew. We began operating independently, taking contracts that others were too weak-willed to complete. Admiral Chen studied the Void Empress carefully. When did the contracts become conquests? The question hung in the air like a weapon waiting to strike. Kexathera stopped pacing and stood perfectly still. When I realized that every government, every authority structure, every law in this galaxy exists to protect the comfortable and punish the vulnerable. The same systems that failed my parents were failing billions of others. Her voice grew cold again, but now Chen could hear the pain underneath the ice. I decided that if the universe was ruled by strength, I would become strong enough to remake it properly. No more committees debating while children starve. No more diplomatic protocols that protect murderers. No more laws that favor the powerful while the innocent suffer. You became everything you once fought against, Chen said quietly. Kexathera's weapon snapped back up to point directly at the Admiral's head. I became what was necessary. Did you? Or did you become just another Corvan commander, taking what you want because you have the power to do it? The accusation hit like a physical blow. Kexathera's finger moved to the trigger, and her officers tensed, ready for violence. But Chen continued speaking, her voice calm and steady. Tell me, Lyrale, when was the last time you actually helped someone who couldn't help you back? The question echoed through the laboratory like a challenge to everything Kexathera had built her empire upon. Her finger remained poised on the trigger, but she found herself unable to pull it. When was the last time she had helped someone who couldn't help her back? The memories that surfaced were not ones she wanted to examine. Conquered worlds stripped of resources to fuel her war machine, populations enslaved or relocated to serve her empire's needs, leaders executed not for cruelty or oppression, but simply for refusing to submit. You don't understand, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Sometimes you have to be harsh to create a better future. Like the Corvans were being harsh with your people? Chen asked. They probably told themselves they were creating a better future too. That's not the same thing. But even as she said it, Kexathera could hear how hollow the word sounded. Isn't it? They wanted your planet for strategic purposes. You want entire star systems for the same reason. They believed their goals justified their methods. So do you. Admiral Chen took another step forward, bringing herself within arm's reach of the weapon still pointed at her head. The difference is that you once knew better. You once understood that there were lines you shouldn't cross, people you shouldn't sacrifice for the greater good. Those ideals were naive, Kexathera protested. The galaxy doesn't work that way. Maybe not, But maybe the problem isn't the galaxy. Maybe the problem is people like the Corvins, and like what you've become." The words hung in the air between them. Around the laboratory, both human prisoners and Imperial soldiers watched in fascination as the most feared being in the galaxy struggled with questions she had not allowed herself to ask in centuries. "Even if that were true," Kexathera said slowly, "it's too late to change anything. I've done too much, hurt too many people. There's no going back." "There's always a choice to go forward differently," Chen replied. "That's what makes us human. That's what makes anyone truly alive." "Humans," Kexathera almost smiled. "You keep fighting even when you know you can't win. Just like my parents did. Just like you used to do when you were Lyra Lay." The name still sent shocks through her system. For 300 years, she had buried that identity so deeply that she sometimes forgot it had ever existed. But now it was surfacing like a drowning victim finally reaching air. "Why?" Kexathera asked suddenly. "Why research my past? What did you hope to accomplish?" Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "We studied the histories of all the major galactic powers. Most conquerors fall into predictable patterns. They want wealth, territory, or power for its own sake. But your empire was different." She gestured around the laboratory. "Your territories are governed more efficiently than most democratic systems. Crime rates are lower. Resource distribution is more equitable. You rule with an iron fist, but you also feed the hungry and provide medical care to everyone." Kexathera frowned. She had never thought of her administrative policies as particularly noteworthy. They were simply logical ways to maintain stability. "We realized you weren't conquering for personal gain," Chen continued. "You were trying to fix what you saw as fundamental problems with how galactic civilization operates. The question was whether the person who started this empire could be reached. And if she couldn't be?" Admiral Chen's smile was sad, but genuine. "Then humanity would fight you until the last of us was dead. But we hoped that deep down, Lyrale Thekmara was still in there somewhere." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent chime from the laboratory's communication system. General Vorth moved to answer it. "Empress, we're receiving distress signals from the Rigel system. The Corvin hegemony has launched a massive offensive against the refugee settlements there." Kexathera turned away from Chen, her mind immediately shifting to tactical considerations. The Rigel system housed millions of displaced civilians from dozens of species, all seeking shelter from various conflicts throughout the galaxy. "What are the Corvin objectives?" she asked. "Unknown, but their fleet composition suggests they intend to eliminate the settlements entirely. Intelligence estimates 3 million civilian casualties if they succeed." The old Kexathera would have calculated whether intervening served her strategic interests. The refugee settlements produced nothing of military value and had no resources worth claiming. Saving them would cost ships and personnel while providing no tactical advantage. But she found herself thinking about something else entirely. When was the last time she had helped someone who couldn't help her back? "Empress?" General Vorth waited for orders. Kexathera looked at Admiral Chen, who was watching her with careful attention. The human said nothing, but her expression made it clear that this moment would define everything that came next. "Signal the fleet," Kexathera said finally. "All ships are to proceed immediately to the Rigel system. We will engage the Corvin forces before they reach the settlements." "Ma'am?" Vorth looked confused. "The refugees have no military significance. Wouldn't our resources be better used?" "Did I ask for strategic analysis, General?" The ice was back in her voice, but underneath it, Chen could hear something else. Something that sounded almost like hope. "No, Empress. I'll relay your orders immediately." As Vorth moved to coordinate the fleet movement, Kexathera turned back to Chen. "This doesn't change anything between our forces," she said. "Humanity will still face a choice. Submit to Imperial authority or continue this hopeless resistance. I understand, Chen replied. But maybe when this is over, we can discuss terms that don't involve submission. What would you suggest instead? Partnership? Alliance? Recognition that maybe humans and the reformed empire of Lyrale Thekmara could accomplish more together than either could alone. The name still felt strange when applied to herself, like putting on clothes that no longer fit properly. But for the first time in centuries, Kexthara found herself wondering what it would feel like to be that person again. The Corvins will have significant firepower, she said, instead of answering directly. If humans want to participate in this engagement, your ships will follow Imperial battle protocols. Admiral Chen's smile brightened considerably. Understood. We'll coordinate with your tactical officers. As both fleets prepared to jump to hyperspace, Kexthara stood alone at the observation deck of her flagship. Below her, the captured human research station was being restored to operational status by joint teams of Imperial and human engineers. She caught her reflection in the transparasteel viewport. For just a moment, instead of the Void Empress, she saw a young woman who had once believed that the galaxy could be healed rather than conquered. Maybe it still could be. The hyperspace jump engaged, carrying both fleets toward the Rigel system and an uncertain future. Behind them, the Kepler station continued its research into names and their power, the work now overseen by scientists from two species who had discovered they shared more than either had expected. In the end, Admiral Chen had been right about the power of true names. Sometimes speaking them aloud was enough to wake up the person who had been sleeping underneath all the titles and fears. Sometimes it was enough to change everything.